I stood in the dark doorway of my wife's study at 5 in the morning, holding a heavy brass key I'd taken from my stepdaughter's coat. My hands were shaking. For 4 months, my body had felt like it was shutting down. My head was foggy, my chest felt heavy, and everyone kept telling me I was just getting old. I pulled back the wool rug near the bookcase and unlocked the small safe hidden in the floorboards. Inside was a manila folder filled with our property deeds and life insurance policies. Right at the top lay an official state document with a gold stamp. It was a certificate of death. My name, Arthur James Vance, was printed across the top line. My age, 56, was correct. My home address was correct. Under cause of death, it read acute myocardial infarction. The only line left completely blank was the date. Clipped to the corner was a note in my wife Sarah's handwriting. File immediately upon official paramedic arrival. I didn't panic. The fog in my mind cleared instantly. The sudden health scares, the blood pressure spikes, the constant push to transfer my assets, it wasn't an illness. They were killing me. I heard footsteps upstairs. I folded the document, stuffed it into my coat pocket, locked the safe, and kicked the rug back over the hatch. Sarah walked in carrying 2 coffee mugs. She gave me her soft, rehearsed smile, the same look she'd given me every morning while feeding me poison. She asked why I was up so early. I lied and said I was looking for my reading glasses. We walked into the kitchen. My 24-year-old stepdaughter, Chloe, sat at the counter, tapping a pen against her phone. Sarah set a plastic cup with 2 white pills next to my coffee mug. She told me to take my heart medication while the coffee was hot. I looked down at the black liquid. A thin, oily sheen floated across the surface. Chloe stopped tapping her pen. Both of them stood still, watching me, waiting for me to drink. I picked up my coat instead. I slid the pills into my pocket with my thumb and told them I was heading to the bank to meet the loan officer about our property deeds. Chloe dropped her pen. Sarah's eyes narrowed. She told me I must be confused again, reminding me that the doctor said my memory was failing. She stepped between me and the garage door, offering to call the bank for me. I looked Sarah straight in the eyes and told her the truth. The bank called because someone tried to submit forged signatures to transfer our house into a trust 2 days ago. The room went dead silent. They realized the confused old man they had been drugging for months was gone. I stepped past my wife, walked out to my car, and locked the door behind me. I had my death certificate pressed against my chest, and I knew I had to act fast before they filled in the date. I drove straight to an independent clinic 2 towns over. I paid cash under a fake name to get my blood tested and handed the nurse a small plastic vial containing the coffee I had poured from my mug into a travel flask. The doctor returned 40 minutes later with a look on his face that confirmed everything. My blood contained high levels of digitalis, a heart medication I was never prescribed. In small daily doses, it builds up silently, causing confusion, fatigue, and eventually a fatal cardiac arrest that looks entirely natural on an autopsy. I sat in my car in the clinic parking lot, staring at the steering wheel. I had 2 choices: go to the police right now or go back home and find the rest of the proof. If I went to the police with just a blank certificate and a blood test, Sarah's lawyer would claim I was confused and self-medicating. I needed the physical paper trail, the forged trust documents, and the updated life insurance policy. I drove back home at noon. The house was quiet. My car pulled into the driveway, and I saw Sarah's SUV parked outside. When I walked through the front door, Sarah and Chloe were sitting at the dining table with a man in a dark suit. Spread out between them were legal folders, medical forms, and a laptop. The man introduced himself as Dr. Harrison, a private medical evaluator hired by my wife. Sarah stood up, her face a mask of soft, tragedy-stricken grief. She told me gently that after my confused behavior this morning, she had no choice but to bring someone in to assess my mental competence. They weren't just trying to poison me anymore. They were setting up the legal safety net. If I proved I had dementia on paper, Any report I made to the police would be thrown out as delusional ranting. Dr. Harrison asked me to sit down and take a simple cognitive test. I looked at Sarah. She gave me a subtle, reassuring nod, her hand resting lightly on Chloe's shoulder. I sat at the table, looked the doctor in the eye, and asked him a simple question. "Doctor, before we begin, why does my wife's private file contain an emergency power of attorney signed by me 3 days ago when I was out of state on a business trip?" Chloe's hands tightened on the edge of the table. Dr. Harrison looked confused and turned toward Sarah. Sarah didn't flinch. She simply reached into her purse, pulled out her phone, and said, "Arthur, you're having another episode. I'm calling the paramedics." Dr. Harrison looked back and forth between us, sensing the shift in the room, but Sarah was already speaking into her phone. Her voice was frantic, rehearsed, and loud enough for everyone to hear. She told the dispatcher her 56-year-old husband was suffering a severe cardiac episode brought on by advanced dementia. 10 minutes later, the front door opened. 2 men in dark uniforms walked into the foyer carrying a heavy medical kit. The lead paramedic, a tall man named Miller with a cold, unreadable face, didn't look at Dr. Harrison. He walked straight toward me, his eyes fixed on my face with an unsettling level of calm. I recognized Miller instantly. He was the man who had come to the house 2 months ago when I had my first severe collapse. He wasn't surprised to see me sitting at the dining table. He didn't even check my pulse. Miller put his heavy gloves on and looked at Sarah. She gave him a short, barely noticeable nod. That was all it took. "Mr. Vance, you're looking pale," Miller said, his voice quiet and firm. "We need to get you onto the gurney outside right now. You're in no condition to be sitting up." Dr. Harrison stood up, clearing his throat. "Wait a moment, I haven't completed my evaluation." Miller stepped right past him, blocking Harrison's view of me. He reached into his tactical chest pouch and pulled out a pre-filled syringe, uncapping it with his thumb. "He's combative," Miller said flatly to his partner. "Hold his shoulder." They weren't trying to treat me. They were going to sedate me, put me in the back of that ambulance, and let the digitalis finish the job on the way to the hospital. By the time we arrived, Miller would fill in the blank date line on the certificate already waiting in Sarah's safe. As the second paramedic reached out to grab my collar, I didn't pull back. I reached down, grabbed the heavy silver water pitcher off the dining table, and smashed it across Miller's face. The glass shattered. Water and ice poured over the legal documents on the table. Miller stumbled back, swearing as blood broke across his nose. Chloe screamed. Dr. Harrison knocked his chair over backwards, trying to get out of the way. Before the second paramedic could react, I slammed my elbow into his ribs, spun around, and ran straight for the back hallway. My heart was pounding violently, not from the poison, but from raw adrenaline. "Close the front door," Sarah yelled behind me. "Don't let him out." I reached my study, threw the door shut, and turned the deadbolt just as Miller's heavy shoulder slammed against the wood from the outside. The frame creaked. I didn't have time to think. I grabbed my leather briefcase from beside the desk, shoved the blood test results and the vial from the clinic inside, and opened the double French doors leading to the back patio. Behind me, the lock on the study door gave way with a loud crack. I ran into the backyard, cleared the low wooden fence, and hit the gravel alleyway running. Behind the house, Miller's partner came sprinting around the side of the garage, but I was already at my car, which I had left parked near the street. I scrambled into the driver's seat, jammed the key into the ignition, and locked the doors just as Miller reached the window, beating his fist against the glass. I slammed the car into reverse, tires screeching against the asphalt, and tore out onto the main road. I looked in the rearview mirror. Sarah was standing at the end of the driveway, phone in hand, watching me drive away. She wasn't chasing me anymore. She didn't have to. She knew that as long as I was on the run, she could tell the police her mentally unstable husband had just assaulted a paramedic and fled into the night. I didn't drive to the police. Not yet. Going to the station with a bleeding paramedic behind me and Sarah's fake dementia reports on file meant I'd be handcuffed and sedated in a holding cell before I could explain a single document. I needed the anchor. I needed Dr. Richard Evans, my primary physician for 15 years, Sarah's cousin, and the man whose signature made my legal execution possible. It was 2:30 p.m. when I pulled into the rear parking lot of Evans' private medical clinic. My hands were steady now, frozen in a cold, absolute focus. I kept my coat zipped to hide the torn sleeve from the struggle in my study, grabbed my briefcase, and walked in through the staff entrance using the passcode Evans had given me years ago when we were still friends. I bypassed the waiting room and walked straight into his corner office. Evans was sitting at his mahogany desk, dictating notes into a small recorder. When the door clicked shut behind me, he looked up, smiling, until he saw my face and the heavy silver briefcase in my hand. "Arthur," he lowered the recorder, his voice tightening. "What are you doing here? Sarah called me 10 minutes ago. She said you had a psychotic break." "Shut up, Richard," I said, my voice flat, almost devoid of emotion. I stepped up to his desk, unlocked the briefcase, and pulled out 2 items. First, the official blood panel from the independent clinic showing fatal toxic levels of digitalis. Second, the certificate of death from Sarah's safe. I laid them side by side on his blotter, directly over his paperwork. Evans looked down. The color drained from his face so fast it was like watching a sheet pulled over a corpse. His eyes darted to the death certificate, specifically to the line under cause of death acute myocardial infarction, written in the exact clinical phrasing he used in his own chart notes. Where did you get that?" he whispered, his throat visibly working as he tried to swallow. "Sarah's safe," I said, leaning over the desk until I was inches from his face. "The date line is blank, Richard, but your signature is already at the bottom certifying my medical history of heart failure. You signed off on a murder before it even happened." "Arthur, listen to me." He reached for his desk phone. I grabbed his wrist, slamming his hand flat against the desk. He flinched, staring at me in shock. "You filed false medical reports declaring me mentally incompetent 3 weeks ago," I said, staring into his eyes. "You prescribed digitalis under a fake pharmaceutical registry, and you gave Miller the green light to sedate me today. If I die, you get a kickback from the trust. If I live, you go to prison for attempted murder, fraud, and medical treason." "She told me you were already dying," Evans gasped, his composure completely shattering. "She said you had 6 months left and just wanted to settle the estate without taxes. She told me you agreed to it." "Look at the blood test, Richard," I snapped. "I wasn't dying. You were poisoning me." Sweat broke out across his forehead. He stared at the lab results, realization finally cutting through his greed. He realized Sarah hadn't just used him to kill me. She had set him up to take the fall the moment an autopsy was performed. What do you want?" he stammered, his hands trembling violently. "You're going to open your computer right now," I told him, pushing the keyboard toward him. "You are going to officially revoke the dementia diagnosis in the state medical database. Then you are going to write a signed affidavit confessing that Sarah Vance coerced you into falsifying my records, and you are going to hand me the original digitalis prescription log." Evans hesitated for a fraction of a second, his eyes darting toward the door. "If you don't," I added quietly, "I walk out this door, drive straight to the state medical board and the FBI, and drop this death certificate with your signature on it. You won't just lose your license, Richard. You'll die in a federal cell." Evans stared at the death certificate, then at me. Without another word, he pulled his keyboard close and started typing. I drove to the Central Police Precinct with Evans's signed affidavit, the digitalis prescription logs, and the blank death certificate resting on the passenger seat inside my briefcase. Rain had started falling, heavy and relentless against the windshield, blurring the red taillights of the cars ahead of me. I didn't walk through the front doors like a victim. I walked in like a man delivering an indictment. The precinct was loud, phones ringing, officers moving suspects through processing, the smell of damp coats and stale coffee hanging thick in the air. I walked straight up to the front desk and asked to speak directly to the lead detective on duty. The desk sergeant looked up from his monitor, unimpressed by my rain-soaked coat and tense posture. "If you're filing a report, sir, take a seat over there. An officer will be with you when they're free." "My name is Arthur Vance," I said, keeping my voice low, clear, and perfectly steady. "My wife, her daughter, and an off-duty paramedic are currently filing a false report claiming I am a mentally incompetent fugitive who assaulted an emergency worker." The sergeant paused, his fingers hovering over his keyboard. "I have my own death certificate right here in this briefcase," I continued, unlatching the silver locks with 2 sharp clicks. "Signed by my doctor, missing only tonight's date. I also have a sworn confession from that same doctor, admitting to poisoning me under my wife's direction. You can call Detective Miller or whoever is handling her fake call, or you can get a homicide detective out here right now before they realize I'm still breathing." 5 minutes later, I was sitting in a windowless interview room across from Detective Sarah Mercer, a sharp, 40-something investigator with tired eyes and a no-nonsense manner. I didn't waste time on emotion. I laid the documents out on the metal table in chronological order, the independent blood panel showing toxic digitalis levels, the printout of the forged property transfer documents, Dr. Evans's signed confession detailing Sarah's plan and his involvement, the physical death certificate bearing my name, and a blank date line. Detective Mercer didn't speak for 10 long minutes. She read every single page, her pen hovering over a yellow legal pad. She picked up the death certificate, holding it by the edges, examining the gold seal and Evans's original signature at the bottom. "This is extraordinary, Mr. Vance," she said slowly, looking up at me. "If these documents hold up, this isn't just domestic dispute. This is premeditated attempted murder and grand estate fraud." "They're real," I said. "And right now, my wife is likely clearing out our joint bank accounts or preparing to run, because I escaped her house 3 hours ago." Mercer stood up, opened the interview room door, and barked orders to 3 officers standing in the hallway. "Get a warrant team prepped for the Vance residence immediately. Put a hold on all bank accounts associated with Arthur and Sarah Vance, and get a unit over to Dr. Richard Evans's clinic to secure his server and hold him for questioning." She turned back to me, her face grim. "Mr. Vance, I need you to stay right here. We're going to secure the house." "I'm coming with you," I said flatly. "You're a key witness and a victim, Arthur. It's not safe." "She has my life's work in that safe, detective," I said, leaning across the table. "And she spent 6 months trying to erase me. I want to be there when she realizes I'm the one standing outside her door." Mercer looked at me for 3 seconds, reading the absolute resolve in my eyes, then gave a single nod. "Put on a vest. Stay in the back of my cruiser until I tell you it's clear." 20 minutes later, 3 marked police cruisers and Mercer's unmarked sedan pulled up the long, tree-lined driveway of my house. The front lights were all on, casting long, sharp shadows across the wet lawn. The trap was finally springing, but this time, I wasn't the target. The rain came down in relentless sheets, blurring the flashing red and blue lights reflecting off the wet pavement of my driveway. 4 officers moved up the front steps, guns drawn at low ready, while Detective Mercer took position beside the front door. I stood by the rear bumper of her cruiser, clad in a heavy black police vest, watching the house I had built 30 years ago turn into a crime scene. Mercer didn't bang softly. She slammed her palm against the heavy oak door 3 times, her voice ringing out through the quiet neighborhood. "Police department, search warrant, open the door." No answer. Through the sheer curtains of the living room window, I saw figures moving fast, frantic, disorganized shapes scrambling toward the back of the house. They weren't preparing to open the door. They were shredding evidence. "Breach it," Mercer ordered. An officer swung a heavy iron ram against the deadbolt. The frame splintered on the second strike, and the front door burst inward with a loud crack. "Police! Nobody move! Hands where we can see them. Officers flooded the foyer. I didn't wait in the car. I stepped out into the rain and walked through the shattered doorway right behind Mercer, my boots crunching over splintered wood and glass. Inside, the living room was chaos. Legal folders were scattered across the coffee table, and an industrial paper shredder was humming loudly in the corner, jammed with thick cardstock. Sarah stood near the fireplace, holding a stack of bank transfers in her hands. Chloe was on her knees by the sofa, frantically trying to wipe a laptop hard drive with a magnet. When the officers pinned Chloe's arms behind her back, her head snapped up. She saw me standing in the doorway, wet, bruised, wearing a ballistic vest and completely alive. Her jaw dropped, the color draining from her face as if she had just seen an actual ghost. "Dad," she whispered, her voice cracking. Sarah froze. The papers slipped from her fingers, fluttering to the floor like autumn leaves. Her eyes darted from Mercer's badge, to the officers filling her hallway, and finally to me. The cool, maternal mask she had worn for years completely dissolved, replaced by raw, frantic terror. "Arthur," Sarah gasped, stepping forward, her hands instinctually reaching out in that fake, comforting gesture she always used. "Arthur, thank God you're okay. These men, they came in here, they said you were missing, they said." "Save it, Sarah," Mercer interrupted, stepping between us and snapping a pair of steel handcuffs around Sarah's wrists. "What are you doing?" Sarah shrieked, struggling against the metal bindings as an officer forced her arms behind her back. "He's confused. He has severe dementia. He attacked a paramedic 3 hours ago. Check his medical records. Dr. Evans signed off on it." "Dr. Evans is currently sitting in an interrogation room at the Central Precinct, Mrs. Vance," Mercer said flatly, her voice like ice. "He signed a full confession. We have the digitalis logs, the forged power of attorney, and the death certificate you left in your floor safe." At the mention of the death certificate, Sarah stopped screaming. She went completely limp in the officer's grip, her eyes widening in realization. She looked at me, no longer seeing a dying, gullible husband, but the man who had outsmarted her. "You knew," she whispered, her voice hollow, stripped of all performance. "You knew the whole time." "I knew the moment I saw the blank date line," I said, walking up until I was standing inches from her face. I pulled the folded certificate from my jacket pocket and held it up so she could see her own handwritten note clipped to the corner. "You were waiting for me to die so you could fill in the numbers. But you forgot one thing, Sarah." She stared at me, trembling, unable to answer. "I built this house," I said quietly. "I know where every secret is buried." "Get them out of here," Mercer ordered. Officers dragged Chloe and Sarah out the front door into the pouring rain, their heels dragging along the wet stone path as they were pushed into the back of separate patrol cars. Chloe was sobbing loudly, begging her mother to do something, while Sarah remained dead silent, staring back at me through the rain-streaked window of the cruiser until the car pulled away. I stood alone in the quiet foyer of my home. The paper shredder was still humming in the corner. The air smelled of rain, damp oak, and stale coffee. Mercer walked back in, wiping rain from her forehead. "We have enough to hold them without bail, Arthur. Attempted murder, conspiracy, grand forgery, and fraud. They aren't getting out." "Thank you, detective," I said softly. I walked down the hallway into my study, stepped over the broken deadbolt on the floor, and looked at the open hatch near the bookcase. The house was mine again. My life was mine again. I sat down at my desk, pulled out a pen, and looked down at the certificate of death resting on the blotter. I didn't tear it up. I folded it neatly and placed it in my breast pocket, a permanent reminder of the day I refused to let them write my ending. 6 months after the flashing police lights faded from my driveway, the real nightmare began. Sarah and Chloe were sitting in a state penitentiary awaiting trial on attempted murder and grand fraud charges. Dr. Evans had surrendered his medical license in exchange for a plea deal, and the corrupt paramedic was facing a federal conspiracy indictment. By all logic, the war was over. I had won. But I quickly learned that the state is far more stubborn than a pair of greedy murderers. It started at a local grocery store on a Tuesday afternoon. I tapped my debit card at the register, only to hear a harsh, double-beep error code. Transaction declined. I tried a second card. Declined. I assumed it was a temporary banking glitch and drove straight to my local branch, the same branch where I had banked for 32 years. The manager, a young man who had taken my mortgage payments for a decade, wouldn't look me in the eye. He sat behind his glass desk, staring at his computer monitor with a pale, unsettled face. "Arthur," he said, his voice dropping to a cautious whisper, "I don't know how to tell you this, but your accounts aren't frozen because of the criminal trial. They were closed 3 days ago." "Closed?" I asked, leaning forward. "On whose authority?" He turned the screen toward me. Highlighted in bright red across my primary profile were 4 words that made my stomach drop into a cold, familiar abyss. Subject deceased, account terminated. "It's an automated system update from the Social Security Administration," the manager explained, his hands visibly hovering above his keyboard as if touching my file might be illegal. "An electronic death certificate bearing your name and social security number was processed through a regional county registrar 2 weeks ago. Once the federal database registers you as dead, every integrated system, your bank, your health insurance, your driver's license, your pension automatically shuts down." "I am standing right here in front of you," I said, slamming my driver's license onto his desk. "Look at me, I am breathing, I am alive." "I can see that, Arthur," he said, stepping back slightly. "But the computer doesn't care. To the system, you don't exist anymore. I literally cannot press a button on this keyboard to override a master death file status. If I try to hand you cash from your own account, the system flags it as posthumous fraud." I walked out of the bank with $0 to my name and drove straight to the Department of Social Security. What followed was 3 months of bureaucratic purgatory. I stood in endless, fluorescent-lit corridors holding a thick manila folder filled with passports, birth certificates, property deeds, and the original court order declaring me alive. I spoke to clerks, supervisors, and regional directors. The terrifying reality was that killing a man on paper is infinitely easier than resurrecting him. Because Sarah's corrupt network had filed an electronic death notice in a neighboring jurisdiction before their arrest, the state apparatus had dutifully processed my demise. The system was designed with absolute trust in the finality of death. It was never built with a reverse gear. My health insurance was canceled, leaving me unable to buy the heart medication I actually needed to recover from the digitalis poisoning. My driver's license was flagged as invalid, meaning every time I drove past a police cruiser, I risked being pulled over and arrested for driving under a dead man's identity. My property taxes bounced, generating automated foreclosure warnings on the house I had spent 30 years paying off. I was a ghost. I could feel pain, I could bleed, I could hunger, but as far as the modern world was concerned, Arthur James Vance had ceased to exist on the night my wife held a pen over a blank document. It took a team of specialized estate attorneys, a court order signed by a federal judge, and a physical appearance at the State Department of Health to manually scrub my name from the master death file. Today, I sit at my kitchen table with my coffee black, clean, and made by my own hands. Beside my mug lies my new, reissued Social Security card and a fresh driver's license. I survived the poison. I survived the betrayal. I survived the legal traps. But buried deep inside the inner pocket of my coat rests the original, blank-dated death certificate from Sarah's safe. I keep it there because I know the truth now. Life isn't guaranteed by your pulse, your heart, or the breath in your lungs. In this world, you are only alive as long as the system allows you to be, and somewhere in a silent server room, my name is still just one broken code away from disappearing forever.